So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This is a chart that one of my faculty at Media Lab created, Cesar Hidalgo. And it's kind of just an interesting map because this is the total amount of information in the world, and this is time. So a long time ago, when you were making pointed sticks, life was kind of simple. You could basically take a product like a pointed stick, and everything you needed to know to build this pointed stick, you could fit inside the cognitive limit of a single individual. You could fit in your brain. But as the world became more complex, we started to have more information than could fit in a single brain, and so you had to have division of labor, and you had to collaborate, and you had the firm or the organization. So then we started to grow in complexity, and companies started to take over sort of intellectual property and coming up with products and ideas. Today, with the internet, as the world is becoming more and more complex, we are now reaching a point where the amount of information that you need to do stuff exceeds the cognitive limit of an organization. So if you take a company like IBM and you double the number of people in IBM, you're not going to double the amount of complexity that IBM can understand. Actually, you may even decrease it. So the idea is that you become a network of companies, an ecosystem of companies and products. And today, the world has become so complex that you can't try to block your company off from everything else. You have to create a network of companies and work together with each of the different companies doing the thing that they're good at. And the reason this is important is this is actually very similar to the philosophy of the internet, which is that you connect things together. And so let me shift back again to some philosophical ideas about the internet. This is Lawrence Leslie, and he wrote an important book called Code. And in this book, Code, he talks about the idea that software is like law. When you write a piece of software, you enable certain behaviors, you disable certain behaviors, and also computer architecture is like politics. And so we know in the UAE, when you block certain things, you can't do voice over IP, you can't do video conferencing H323, those are architectural decisions that have political ramifications. They're technical things, but they have political ramifications. So it's interesting because when Leslie wrote this book, a bunch of software engineers would come up to him and say, I don't want to be political. But the answer is, too bad, you are. You know, what you do, you have to think about the political ramifications of everything you do. And that's why we have to remember that the internet is very political. It can be used for political means, it can just make it easier or harder, and innovation is also political in some ways. This is David Weinberger, and he had a book called Small Pieces Loosely Joined, which is a great way to describe how the internet works. You have open protocols. Just about every cool thing on the internet was created by a very small number of people. I mean, Twitter was tiny when it created the service. The browser was invented by a small group. Just about every important innovation on the internet was done by a small group of either researchers or venture startup people around the edges of the network. And so the internet is really small pieces loosely joined. No one is controlling the whole thing. No one knows the whole of it. And what's really important is that people don't try to anticipate every possible use. Twitter didn't say this is exactly how we want people to use it. What they did was they opened up the API and they said, we don't know how people are going to use it. Let's see what people use it for. And the idea that somebody uses your product in ways that you didn't expect is a good thing. In the old days, in the before internet days, you wanted to know exactly what people were going to do and you wanted to control it. This is also, again, very political. It's kind of the difference between centrally planned systems, like the old Soviet Union, and free markets or somewhat more democratic systems. This is John C. Brown, who used to run Xerox PARC, and he has a book called The Power of Pull. And in this book, he talks about the idea that today, what you do is you want to pull resources as you need them, instead of stocking them. So in the old days, what you did was you would collect money, you would collect people, you would collect knowledge, you would collect intellectual property, you would control it from the center and direct these resources into things that you needed to do, and you were always prepared. Right? Today, what you do is when you need something, you Google it, or you ask somebody, and you can pull the resources that you need as you need them. And the ability to raise money is now, actually, it's pretty easy. So I don't sit around and try to stock all kinds of things like cash and all this other stuff. What I do is, when I need money, I raise it. When I need people, I get it. And the problem is that when you stock stuff, it gets old, it's heavy, you have to protect it, it's cumbersome, it slows you down. And things like code, like if you look at software companies, internet startup companies, I've seen some companies that throw away 80% of their code every week. And the engineers kind of get fussy about this. I just spent the whole week writing this. Well, we're going to pivot this way. And so intellectual property and lines of code can become liabilities because it slows you down, makes you not want to pivot away from them. And so really the idea that having lots of stuff is a good thing isn't actually necessarily true anymore, because you can usually find the stuff when you need it. This is Dave Clark, and he's one of the initial, he was the first head of the Internet Architecture Board. I think he was one of the pioneers that put together TCP/IP. But he had this term, rough consensus running code. So when they were originally designing the internet, what they would do is they'd get on the mailing list and they would discuss stuff and say, this is kind of what we should do. All right, let's write some code, let's build it. So instead of anticipating every single problem and coming up with as a massive specification, they just wrote software and then they played with the software and they let it evolve. And this is very important because this is in software we say waterfall, which is you create a specification, you develop the software for years, and then you test it, you deploy it, and then you maintain it. That's the old way of doing things. That's how you build buildings. That's how you do a lot of government policy. But agile development is you write something, you test it, you see how people respond, and you iterate, and you iterate, and you iterate. And some companies do it every week. You look at Facebook, they launch new features every single week because they're very, very agile. They don't wait and plan 2 years ahead. But this comes from the core of the original philosophy of the internet, which is this idea of rough consensus running code. So you have to throw away your map, and so, again, if you plan everything, well, you can't plan everything, and you can't know everything, because, and you sort of figure it out as you go. So I always think that, you need to have a compass. You need to say, I want to solve the education problem, or I want to do this, or Twitter wants to, give access to billions of people in the world. So you have to have generally an idea of where you want to go. But how you actually get there, you kind of have to figure it out as you go along, because any map that you create is going to be so expensive to make, and it's generally going to be wrong. For example, this is YouTube 2005, dating site with video. I am male, seeking everyone between 18 and 45. Upload video. That was their plan, right? And if they had spent 3 years building this and they stuck to their plan, they wouldn't be here today. They tried this, it didn't work, and then when I met them, they said, oh, we're like Flickr for video. And I said, oh. And then eventually, they became the video embed for MySpace, which was perfect. MySpace was growing like crazy. They needed a video embed. Google was a better product at the time. Google Video was a better product at the time. But Google didn't want to work with MySpace. But YouTube said, no problem, let's become the video embed for MySpace, and they took off like crazy until they were so huge that they became their own thing. But this is, my point here is, this was their plan, right? And they were very happy to change their plan when they realized this wasn't working. And you have to embrace serendipity. So serendipity, I think most of you know, but it's really kind of like luck. There's an interesting study that I heard about where they asked people, do you think you're lucky or do you think you're unlucky? And they took them and they gave them this test, which was to go through a newspaper and count the number of photos in the newspaper. And on the first page, when they turned the page, it said, there are 42 pictures in the newspaper, it said there. And so the people who checked that they were lucky said, oh, cool, I'm lucky, it says 42, okay. Then they run to the end of the place where they're supposed to finish the thing, because they believe this thing. And then along the way, they have a little piece of money on the floor, and they notice that, and they picked it up. So all the lucky people picked up the money and finished first. The unlucky people didn't believe that there were 42 pictures, so they had to count everything. And then once they're going, they're so focused on delivery that they didn't see the money on the ground, right? And so luckiness is really something that you kind of have to have the right state of mind. You have to be sort of trusting, you have to be aware of what's going around you, and you have to embrace serendipity.